If you're looking to improve your language skills in English, one of the best things you can do is read. And today I want to share with you some specific book recommendations for those of you that are at a C2 or proficient level of English. When we're talking about SEFR, this is the highest level of proficiency that you can reach in a second language. So these texts are going to be quite challenging, but I think it's a fantastic option if you're already at a proficient level in English and are wanting to take things to the next level. The first book I want to share with you is actually an epic poem. It's called Paradise Lost by John Milton, and it was published in 1667. This is a retelling of the story of Adam and Eve from the Bible and also the fall of Satan. Now, I said this is an epic poem, and that's important because at the time when this was written, epic poetry was typically written only in Greek or Latin. Think the Odyssey by Homer. English wasn't considered elevated or prestigious enough to be used for epic poetry. Now, the author Milton, he knew several other languages, so he had other options, but he chose to write this in English, and that was making a big statement. He was saying English is an elevated language, and it deserves to be used in things like epic poetry. This is definitely a challenging read, but it was an important part of the development of English literature and so worth it if you're up for the challenge. The next recommendation I have for you is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This was published in 1861 and is a part of Victorian literature. This book is important because it helped define the coming-of-age story, which is also sometimes called Bildungsroman. The main character in this story is a young boy named Pip. We start out with him as a child living in poverty. However, there's a point in the story where Pip mysteriously receives financial support. He becomes a gentleman, and we follow him up through adulthood. Now, what's interesting is Dickens was able to combine a coming-of-age story with social criticism. Through Pip's rise in social class, the novel explores wealth, ambition, and class anxiety. The next classic book that I recommend if you're at the C2 level is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This was published in 1847 and is a Gothic novel. A lot of times people mistakenly assume that this is a love story, but I wouldn't say this is anywhere near a romance. It's much more about the cycle of abuse, obsession, and revenge. This book is important because it broke away from many conventions of Victorian storytelling. Bronte used a darker, more psychologically intense form of storytelling. Something interesting that Bronte did with this novel was create morally ambiguous characters instead of clear heroes that would have been more expected at the time. One of the most famous characters in this story and also just in literature is Heathcliff. In some ways, we sympathize with Heathcliff because we see him experience so much suffering as a child and also up into adulthood. On the other hand, we see him really act as the abuser and cause suffering for so many other characters in the story. And it creates this inner conflict for the reader. I don't have a physical copy of this book, but the next suggestion that I have for you is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This book was published in 1925 and was an important part of the modernism movement. The entire story takes place in just one single day in post-World War I London. We follow our main character, Clarissa Dalloway, as she prepares for a party that she's going to hold in the evening. This novel is unique for several reasons. One of those reasons is that Woolf uses a stream of consciousness technique in her writing. This means that you're kind of in the character's mind, and she does this not just with her main character, Clarissa Dalloway, but with many characters. So as you're reading the novel, you're kind of jumping around between characters' minds. This does make the story a bit difficult to follow at times, but it was very experimental and an important part of the development of English literature. Woolf chose to focus on themes like consciousness, time, and memory, which was unique. She also dealt with topics related to mental health. For example, PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder is what we'd call it nowadays. At the time, they didn't have that specific term, but they would have called it something like shell shock. Remember, this story is set in post-World War I London. So the characters in the novel, and also people in the real world, were dealing with the effects of war. And you can see in the novel, there's a character named Septimus who is experiencing PTSD, and the doctors and people around him really don't know how to deal with this. And Woolf used this character and the story itself to really bring to attention this topic. And as we are in the characters' minds, we also see throughout the story of Mrs. Dalloway a contrast between people's inner world and outside appearances. The next recommendation I have for you is Hamlet by William Shakespeare. This was written around the year 1600, and of course it's a play instead of an actual novel. Specifically, Hamlet is a tragedy. In this story, we follow a grieving Prince Hamlet after he learns the dark truth about his father's death. One of the reasons why Hamlet is so special is because William Shakespeare created this very psychologically complex character. As I said, this story is a tragedy, and at the time, tragedies focused more on action, but Hamlet turns inward. Prince Hamlet struggles with doubt, hesitation, morality, and mortality. Let me know if you've read any of these books here below or if you'd like more suggestions. And don't forget to subscribe if you're an advanced English learner, because that's what Inglés na Hora is all about.